Good afternoon, students. Are you hearing my voice? Yeah, right. Today, we are going to see about present struggles in India. One of the concept which is part and parcel of tribal and peasant movements in 19th and 20th centuries. The paper three. We already have some discussion over the tribal movements in India, and today we'll see some a sort of a description over these peasant struggles in India. Okay, so I'll give you some um, introduction towards these peasant struggles in India. Before that, we'll see what are the important factors which uh, led to peasant movements which taken place in India. Okay, so cultivation has been in existence in India from ancient times, since the Indus Valley civilization. It is the belief of the people that it is a part of their cultural pride. At present, they adapt agriculture not because it is profitable, but because they have no other alternative, and they can feed themselves at least for a few months from yield they are getting. The process of proletarianization of agricultural laborers has increased during the last few decades, and they are more dependent on wage labor while losing the extra economic relations with their employers, which govern the conditions of their work and life. Barrington Moore's Jr. in his celebrated work, Social Origins, Dictatorship and Democracy, Lord and Peasant in the Making of Modern World, questions the revolutionary potential of the Indian present. He observes that landed upper classes and the peasants played an important role in bourgeoisie revolutions leading to capitalist societies in England and France. The aberrative bourgeoisie revolutions leading to fascism in the Germany and Italy, and the peasant revolutions leading to communism in Russia and China. But peasant rebellions in pre-modern India were relatively rare and completely ineffective. Modernization impoverished the peasants at least as much as in China, and over as long period of time. The Indian peasants to uh, more is traditionally domicile and passive. A British colonial rule and plundering the labor of farmers are the chief reasons for the farmers' movements in India. And the methods the British adopted towards the farmers turned their lives most miserable. And the British introduced the permanent land revenue system in the beginning in the Bengal and Bihar. Later, it was extended to all the regions. This system was upgraded the position of jamindars and tax collectors into landlords, and degraded the position of the farmers into tenant. Farmers lost many their rights owing to this system. And Raitwari system introduced in Bombay and Madras presidencies also had its defects and subjected the farmers to a number of untold sufferings. As per the system, the land tax was high, and the farmers were forced to pay it off even when there was most unexpected natural catastrophes. In this system, only one jamindar was placed instead of many Jamindars, and it made him the foe of the farmers. The defects in the revenue or tax collecting system pushed the farmers into abject poverty. He is forced to borrow money from money lenders at high interest, as there were no other source of income. Often he sold the land to the same money lender since he could not repay the amount taken. Thus, the lands which do not have any protection went into the grip of the money lenders. The social status of the farmers got down one step, and as a result of this, a vast majority of such farmers turned into tenants and finally became the laborers. It is not inappropriate to mention that the British government also sided the money lenders who never bothered to think of the welfare of the farmers. The British regime called anarchic, but it was undoubtedly a period of most unfortunate times. The hardship faced by our farmers were narrated by many historians from the West. The contractors of tax collection dreamed of his becoming a rich man, but never thought the poor farmers' welfare nor losses they suffer from. It was immaterial for him whether the farmer lived or died. The beginning of 19th century witnessed the extreme of the farmers' poverty which drove them to leave their homes and villages. The cause of this exodus took place because of the Jamindars who acted as the agents of the British officials. The atrocities to which the farmers were subjected to can be seen in the fifth report circuit committee, which was later abbreviated to 26 charges and progenited the Prakasham Committee. So India is predominantly an agrarian country where 70% of its population still depends on agriculture for its livelihood. They were differentiate in terms of their relationship with the ownership of land, such as supervisory agriculturists, owners, cultivators, sharecroppers, tenants, and landless laborers. In local parlance, they are known as the Kisans. Thanks to influence of Western scholarship, uh, Western scholarship, Kisan is often translated as peasant in academic literature published in English. It is known to the history that Indian Kisan waged a tireless battle against all sorts of oppression for his sustenance. In 1870, the Kisan movement began in East Bengal. The Jamindars of Bengal are notorious for the began to exploit, humiliate the farmers by confiscating their property illegally and by using coercive methods. The farmers who were accustomed to the tradition of resisting these methods united themselves into societies. They demanded for the abolition of land tax and began to attack the Jamindars and their agents. It was only when the government intervened and suppressed the movement by taking stringent measures. As a result of the movement, Tenant Act was framed in 1885 for the first time in Bengal, which receded the attacks on the farmers. This act provided an opportunity to some categories of farmers to become permanent tenants of the land. When you see the theories of peasant movements and an attempt to understand why peasant organizations emerged in some parts of South India and did not develop in other areas can benefit by drawing upon the findings of scholars who have studied peasant movements, uprising and revolutions in different societies. In many parts of the world, peasant movements were initiated and led by communist workers. However, the main tradition of Marxist theory until the turn of the century ignored the revolutionary potential of the peasantry. Karl Marx did not believe that peasantry could provide them the basis for the formation of class conscious proletariat. He stated that the small peasants form a vast mass, the members of which live in similar conditions, but without entering into manifold relations with one another, instead of bringing them into mutual intercourse. In so far as there is merely a local interconnection among these small peasants, and the identity of interests begets no unity, no national union, and no political organization. They do not form a class. Okay, so there is therefore no potential for revolution. Though Lenin's concept an alliance between the working class and peasantry broke with this orthodox tradition, the revolutionary potential of the peasantry was still not fully appreciated. It was the role played by peasantry in the revolutions of China, Vietnam, and Cambodia, which completely demolished this orthodox approach and established that in appropriate circumstances, the peasantry can be the source and means of revolution in agrarian societies. The problem is one of identifying these appropriate custom circumstance and characteristics and molding them into a revolutionary channel. While many practitioners have tried and are trying with varying degrees of success to direct the peasantry into a revolutionary channel, scholars have identified several characteristics of agrarian societies which can facilitate or retard such movements. In examining background of peasant wars in Mexico, Russia, and China, and Eric R. Wolf found that though peasants are especially handicapped in passing from passive recognition of wrongs to political action as means of setting those right occasions when they rose in revolt and brought about revolutionary changes are not few. Okay, so examining the role of different segments of the peasant society in revolutionary upheavals, Wolf pointed out that during the Russian and Chinese revolutions, the middle peasantry were its promoters in rural areas rather than poor. He believed that the decisive factors in making a peasant rebellion possible was a relation of the peasantry to surrounding field of power. The poor peasants are the landless laborers who depended on a landlord for their livelihood, had no tactical power, and were not in position to pursue the course of rebellion unless they were able to rely on some external power. The rich peasant was not interested in the rebellion as he was already in privileged position. The section of the peasantry which lacked the internal leverages in political context was the land owing middle peasantry or the peasantry located in peripheral area outside the dominion of the landlord control. Further, peasants were often the worst victims of the economic charges brought on by commercialism, and they were also exposed to the influence of the developing proletariat. The circumstances led the middle peasantry to be on the vanguard of peasant upheavals. However, when you see the such revolutions cannot be achieved by peasants alone without any leadership. Even though the peasantry could reshape the social structure of certain areas, it could not lay hold of the state of the cities which house the centers of control or the strategic non-agricultural resources of the society. Thus, a peasant rebellion in a complex society tends to self limited. Okay, when you see the peasant movements in India, the source of peasant movements in India became difficult on account of the paucity of comprehensive data on the subject. With this basic limitation, an attempt is made here to analyze in terms of historical evolution in India. Historically, the peasant movements in India can be broadly grouped into the three distinct features. One is the initial phase in between 1857 to 1921. This phase was characterized by sporadic growth of peasant movements in the absence of proper leadership. And in the second phase, between 1923 to 46, this phase was marked by the emergence of the class conscious peasant organizations. Its distinct feature was that during this period, peasant movements were led by the people who gave priority to Kisan problems in the struggle for national liberation. Uh, and post-independence phase. This era witnessed the uninterpreted continuity of the agrarian movements due to failure of ruling party to resolve any of the basic problems of the toiling masses in the rural India. The peasant struggles in this period were led predominantly by left political parties like the Communist Party of India, Praja Socialist Party, and the Socialist Party through their Kisan organizations. When you see the initial phase, the tyranny of Jabindars, along with the exorbitant rates of British land revenue, led to a series of spontaneous peasant uprising in different parts of the country during this period. The periodic recurrence of famine coupled with economic depression during the last decades of 19th century further aggravated the situation in the rural areas and consequently led to numerous peasants revolts. Okay, so and when you see the such tribal rebellions, uh, like the Santals of Hazaribagh, Midnapur, Bankura, Birbhum, Manbhum, etc., were the worst sufferers due to the permanent settlement, and the police and other government officials did not protect their interests, rather exploited them. And Santals, under the leadership of Sidhu and Kanhu, raised in 1856 with a view to put an end to the colonial rule in India. They disrupted the railway and postal communication between Bhagalpur and Rajmahal Hills. Okay, so and the British troops became alert and force under the Major Barrow suffered a defeat at the lands of Santals. The British took repressive measures, arrested the Santal leaders, and quelled the rebellion. The rebellion was pacified with the creation of a separate district consisting of Santal Pargana. However, in the Great Revolt of 1857, peasants of Awadh and Western UP participated and fought against the British authority. When you see Indigo Revolt, meanwhile, the indigo growers' revolts had flared up in Bengal in the year of 1859. On the one hand, this revolt was directed against the indigo planters. On the other, it grew into a rent strike against the planter Jamindars. We shall refer briefly to the system of indigo cultivation in order to comprehend the issues involved in this peasant uprising, which was a landmark in the history of peasant movement in Bengal. And the British merchants embarked upon indigo cultivation in Bengal and built factories in Malda, Pabna, and Nadia, Jessore, Midnapur, Rangapur, and Rajshahi and Purania. And there is a great deal of evidence to show that planters had to pay high rent to the Bengal Jamindars to get land for indigo cultivation. Some of them, notably Dwarkanath Tagore, who choose to be planters. The value of land increased the villages where indigo cultivation had extended, extended. And apparently, the Bengal Jamindars had a stake in indigo cultivation. In 1860, the indigo growers revolt merged with the rest distributors that came in the wake of Rent Act of 1859. As Hunter tells us, the operation of the act has resulted in enhancement of the rents, and this perhaps has been most marked in those parts where the indigo planters are landlords. A new phase of the revolt started as the riots, consisting the payment of rent beyond, sorry, rent charged by the planters, planter jamindars. The fact is that power still remained with the jamindars who wanted to teach the uh, Sahai planters a lesson in the decade following the Indigo Revolt, which surely radicalized the peasants. Rent disturbance continued to occur in a few regions and snowballed into a uprising in 1873. When you see peasant revolt in Pabna, now it was a rent distribution disturbance which were directed against the Bengal Jamindars. The Tenancy Act of 1859 was primarily primarily designed to safeguard the interests of the rising class of Jotedars and rich peasants. All the evidence confirms that enhancement of rent preceded after 1859. Hunter refers to the high increasing in the rent in Hooghly and Mymensingh and Dhaka. In Pabna Jabindas, as Campbell noted in 1873, severe no notice of enhancement and attempted in the present year to make both further enhancement and consolidation of the regular cess with the rent by illegal and improper means. Meanwhile, jute cultivation had extended to East Bengal districts and also Murshidabad, Nadia, and 24 Pargana in West Bengal. The area under jute cultivation was about 8 lakh 50,000 acres in 1874. Rich peasants benefit from the jute cultivation and appear to be sufficiently well to do offer an efficient resistance to the Jamindars. Okay, so when you see the Maratha peasants uprising, this was the peasant uprising in Maharashtra, which was mainly directed against the Marwari and Gujarati moneylenders. In Maharashtra, money lending was mostly in the hands of the Marwaris, and mostly uh, moneylenders uh, um, uh, in Maharashtra, money lending was mostly in the hands of the Marwari and Gujarati money lenders, and uh, uh, atrocious rates of interest were common. And for crop loan, 1.5 mounts had to be repaid for every mount borrowed, and loans were advanced on mortgage of land, and the common practice was to resettle the debtor on the land on condition that he could pay half of gross produce as rent. Over the years, there had grown a category of tenants who had no occupancy right. In Pune and Ahmedabad, there was considerable increase in sales and mortgage between 1869 and 74. In 1873, the Bombay courts deposed of about 4 lakh suits. Peasants seldom opposed a suit since they did not want to alienate the Sokas. in Ahmednagar, about an 80 of the occupied occupancies had on an average been transferred to Sokas. And when you see um, the other movements, Gandhiji and Peasant Satyagraha, okay, so we'll see these movements and we'll see very detailedly in the first phase and second phase, and we also had a certain detailed view on this third phase when the Gandhiji enter in the freedom movement. Okay, so dear students, this is about the today's class. You have any doubts or queries regarding this? Now you may welcome to ask. Okay, students, are you hearing my voice? Are you there? Venkatamma and Sailu. Yeah, this is end of my class today, and I will give you these things regarding the peasant struggles in a detailed manner in the first and the second phase, uh, which we roughly divided. Okay, so thank you very much. I am going to end my class now, and thank you, one and all. సాయిలు వెంకటమ్మ ఆర్ హియరింగ్?
ఓకే సార్.
వినిపిస్తుందా? Okay, so this is about my class today, and I am going to ending my class, and I will meet you on Monday. Okay, thank you. I am ending my class.